Ozetta, Izora.
Uh-huh.
How you spell that?
Izora. Bursaw, Bourassa. Peltier.
Okay, it's August 26th, 1983. This is Joe Todd and Judy Michener, an interview with Ozetta Peltier. Mrs. Peltier, where were you born?
Miami, Oklahoma.
And when's your birthday?
February 18th, 1894.
Who is your father?
Daniel J. Bursaw.
Where was he from?
He was born in St. Mary's, Kansas.
And who was your mother?
Ollie Mae Harris.
I'm sorry?
Ollie Mae Harris.
And where was she from?
Well, she was born in Brown County, Ohio.
When did your folks come to Oklahoma or Indian Territory?
I don't know just when they did come, but they must have come with the rest of the Indians, I imagine, when they moved from Kansas.
Judy,
That would be
that was?
somewhere around, somewhere between, when did your father marry your mother, do you know?
Yeah, let's see. August 21st. August 21st, let's see. 1893, I think.
1893. They were married when they came down here? Or did they marry after they
I
got here?
imagine, I never did know that. My folks weren't very talkative, so, but they must have married after they come to Miami. My grandmother and my grandfather on my mother's side come from Missouri after they come from Ohio. They settled in Missouri, and then they moved on down to Miami. And I imagine they met there.
Did your parents ever talk any at all about where they lived in Kansas and what it was like in Kansas?
No.
They never said anything about that. They were original allottees.
My father was.
Your father was. Where was he originally allotted?
At Miami. He
Miami?
took his allotment up there when the rest of the Potawatomis come down to here.
How did he manage to do that?
Well, his mother stopped there, and so he just stayed there too. And his allotment was 3 miles north of Miami.
And that's where you were born?
I was born in a log cabin on the banks of Tar Creek, that awful polluted little stream, but it used to be beautiful.
Oh, I imagine it was. Well, tell me about the log cabin.
Well, it must have been as big as this room or this house, but it was a huge log cabin. And it was whitewashed inside. It was real nice. And then they had a long lean-to in the back, and that was the kitchen and where we ate. And it had a little room upstairs. After my grandmother or grandfather, I don't know when he died, but anyway, my father moved in with my mother, and we lived there till I was 8 or 9 years old, I guess. And then we moved up in the prairie, just east of where they lived there. And my father's allotment was between his mother's allotment and his stepsister's, and his allotment was in the middle. But my grandfather Harris lived on my dad's allotment, so we lived on his sister's place up there, and that's where we lived till I was 16, 1911. Then we moved to Shawnee.
In 1911? What was Shawnee like in 1911?
Well, it had just got rid of the saloons, and there were 2 automobiles in town.
Just 2?
Two automobiles. I think a man by the name of Moman that ran the Odeon. I think he had a car, and J.L. Roebuck had a car. And
What
one,
kind of cars were they?
well, one they called it a white, I think. I didn't know too much about automobiles, but I just heard this. And that's the first.
How come your family moved to Shawnee?
Well, it's a long story. We had some crop failures in 2 or 3 rows in 2 or 3 years in a row. And then my father got interested in this awful Potawatomi business. He come down here and got mixed up in that. And so after we were here a while, he went to work for the Rock Island. I got married. And
Then your father and your grandfather were farmers up around Miami?
yes, they were farmers. He had a big wheat farm, about 300 acres of wheat, oats and corn and stuff.
What kind of chores did you do in the farm?
Well, I was a tomboy. Well, first we'd started out when we made this wheat bed. My father plowed. There come a harrow along behind us, and I rode a drag. It was made out of 2x8 oak, one on top of the other, kind of slanting. And I had a little box here, and I drove 3 horses to it. And that was my first job. I was about 7 years old, and my dad thought I was big enough to go to work. So, and from then on, it was just, whatever it takes to raise a wheat crop. It's mostly work in the spring and the summer.
How much could you plow in a day?
Well, I don't know. When I plowed, we had graduated from the walking plow to a gang plow. And I drove this gang plow, that was mine. And I drove 4 big mules to it. And my brother drove one behind me with one shear. So we could turn up a pretty black streak in a day, But I don't have any idea how much we got. We got out there at daylight and worked till dark. So.
What about chores around the house?
Well, I didn't do too much after I did in the day's work. I always had to do the dishes, though, after supper. And then Saturday come, and it was all clean-up day then. It was wash day and scrub day and every other day.
Tell us about doing laundry.
Oh, well, you just went after it with a rub board and a tub full of water and a big old pot out here to boil your clothes in. First you rubbed them and got them out of that. You put them in a pot and boiled them, and then you took them out of that and you rinsed them a couple of times and put some starch in them and hung them out.
What kind of starch?
Well, sometimes we made our starch out of flour. But most of the time we had faultless starch then, same as we do now.
What kind of soap do you use?
Well, sometimes we had our own soap. My mother made her own soap.
You know how she made it?
No, and I know we put all these old meat rinds and whatever we had, bones and all this, in a pot and boiled them with all this lye. And then they would spread it out some way. And when it got cold, they'd cut it up in bars. Yeah. It was a crude way to work, but they got the clothes clean.
How long you moved to Shawnee in 1911?
I was 16.
16.
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you start school?
I started school at Miami. I went to, my schooling was kind of hit and miss. Mm-hmm. When there was work to do, I did my farm work, and in between I went to school, so my education was kind of limited. Till I got to Shawnee, and then I spent 6 months in the old Western Business College here, but I didn't have a background for business. I didn't have enough education for a business. And along came this handsome young man, and I got married.
Do you remember the end of the Spanish-American War?
I remember when it was going on. I don't remember the end, but I think I must have been about 6 or 7, but I remember hearing my folks talk about it.
What did they say about it?
Well, not too much. I was kind of a rattle-brained little outfit. I didn't listen too good, but I just know there was a war going on someplace, but I didn't have any idea where. we had no telephone and a weekly paper, and so that was
How
about.
was the log cabin furnished?
Well, it was furnished with just ordinary old-time furniture, an iron bed and a dresser and chairs and stand table, but we didn't have anything on the floors. My grandmother had white curtains up. She lived downstairs. She had white curtains, and they were made real pretty. They were all ruffled up. It was nice.
When you moved from the log cabin, what sort of home did you live in after you moved from there?
Well, it was just a 4-room house.
Just a frame house?
No, yeah, just a frame house. It was on the prairie, no trees around, kind of bare.
I'm curious about your kitchen. Tell me about what'd you have in the kitchen?
Well, we had a cook stove, just common old cook stove. We had an old-time cupboard, they call it. It had glass doors in it. And then we had a cabinet that held the flour. These things pull out, with the flour and whatever. And it had shelves up above. And then we had some shelves around the table and chairs, and that was about all.
What about water? Did you have a well, or did you have to carry it from the creek?
No, we had a well. It was a dug well, and you pulled it up, with a bucket on each end of the rope.
How deep was it?
Gosh, I don't know. It was a dug well, but I don't have any idea how deep it was. We never ran out of water. We watered the stock and everything out of it.
How did you keep things cool? Like, did your mother churn butter and things like that?
Well, we hung our butter in the well.
Okay.
And when we could get to town and get ice, we had a little bitty ice box. But most of the time, we hung our milk in a bucket, in a tin bucket down in the well, and our butter. That was the only cooling system we had.
Ozetta, tell me about the hickory nuts.
I can't make anybody believe that.
I believe it, but I want to know. Tell me about
Well,
the hickory nuts.
Miami is located on the Neosho River. It kind of curves around this way, and Miami sits right here. Well, we used to come to Miami, and we went north a little ways onto the Neosho River. My step-aunt owned a little piece of land back there, and these big trees were on her land. And those hickory nuts, now believe it or not, they were that big with the hull on. And the great, about that big, after that, how a hickory nut.
2-3 inches in diameter?
Yeah. And of course, after the hull was off, they weren't that big, but they had a kernel in them as big as an English walnut, and it'd come out like an English walnut. And they were not hard shell like they are here. You could just at least a little hammer, would break them. And they were good. And we used to go down and gather 2 or 3 sacks full every year and take them home. We had hickory nuts all winter.
Did you make connection?
Do what?
I don't. You mean the?
Yeah. I think that's more Cherokee, though. I think it's Cherokee.
Yeah.
No,
it is,
we
where
didn't.
They used to break up the hickory nuts.
No, we didn't do that. But those trees were. It all seemed like a dream, but it was true because I went down there to help pick them. But these youngsters around here, they all used to these little old native hickory nuts here, and they won't hardly believe it. And if I'd go back, I wouldn't know where to go. And if the trees are not all there or dead or died out, well, I wouldn't have any proof. But it was really true that they were that big, I mean.
Did you take music lessons?
Oh, I took about 12 when I was about 10 years old.
What did you play?
I played an organ.
Played the organ, piano?
Yeah, I made a lot of noise. Wasn't much playing, but I made a lot of noise. And folks liked to come around and gather up and sing. We had a little Sunday school down the little empty building down about a quarter of a mile from us, and all the neighborhood gathered in there.
Ozetta, how many brothers and sisters did you have? Brothers and sisters?
There was 10 of us. I was the oldest of the 8 living.
You remember all their names?
Ozetta, Loretta, Thomas, Janetta, Pauline, Cordelia, Virgil, Johnny. That's 8.
That's a large family.
Yeah, I was the oldest. I helped my mother raise her family, and then I jumped into the fire and raised 12 of them.
You didn't have enough of it, did you?
Did your parents or grandparents ever talk about the old Indian ways?
No. In fact, there was no Indians around where we lived. That's the funny part of it. I didn't know any more about Indians than somebody that never seen one. They were not around. Only when my grandmother died when I was real small. That was the end of the Indians. It seemed like everybody was white.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just didn't know anything about Indians.
What was your grandmother's name?
Josetta Moose. That was her, Josetta Moose Versal.
Was she Potawatomi?
Yeah, she was full blood.
Where did Potawatomis come from?
Well, they come up from up around the Great Lakes. That's the last only history I know of them. They come down in a band with several other tribes after they were run away from the lakes. Really, I don't know where they were really originated. Just like I said, I didn't know any more about Indians and because there was no Indians around, and I don't know, my dad always told us it's a white man's world, you got to learn to live in it. So that's what we did. And I just don't know too much about I've learned more since I've been in the last few years than I've ever known in all my life, I guess, about Indians. In fact, we moved from the Indian Agency. We lived out there. My husband worked out there. We moved out on the farm out west of Acme, and it was an Indian farm, and they had an Indian village back up. And when the kids all left and my husband went to work, I was scared stiff of those Indians.
Were those Kickapoo people?
Yeah, the Kickapoos, Yeah, they were Kickapoos.
Can you describe the village?
Well, they had these little round houses that they built with the reed that they gather, and they make big mats, and then they put it around this frame that they make. And they all sleep in that round place, and there's fires in the middle, and this thing has a wick up, I guess you call it, had a place for the smoke to get out.
How big were they?
Oh, I never was in one, but I imagine as big as this room, maybe bigger. I don't know just how big they were. I never did go up there and nose around. Like I said, I was just a little bit frightened.
Real pleased that the picture that Bill gave me to give to somebody, and I gave it to Harrison. It was a big enlargement. I don't know if I showed you that, but it's the Satin Fox bark house, and it's got this family of people in front of it, and lo and behold, Bill came to me, you know Bill, and he said, "You have this thing. We don't have to keep it. Do you know any Satin Foxes like that?" I said, "Sure. I'll give it to Harrison Hunter." You know, and it's a big picture like this. They had it enlarged for a display at one time. You know, it was just back moldering away, and they wanted the space for something else. So he gave me the picture, and I took it down and gave it to Harrison. I think I gave it to him at the powwow. You remember when I went out and I got it and I brought it in? Do you remember seeing it at all?
I don't believe
It's a big picture, and I went outside and got it out of the car and brought it in. Do you know that was Harrison's family?
Oh,
you gotta be kidding.
No, you know, and he identified them. His grandfather, his mother, when she was old.
Oh.
Well,
You
wasn't
know,
that
and I
something?
just thank God that I gave it to him. You know.
Oh,
Right
that's
person.
It was
great.
really, really a stroke, and he's got it hanging over his couch in the living room. That's, you know, when I saw it yesterday, I said, "Oh, you've got the picture." And he said, "Yes, I have." He said, "By the way, and this is, and that is, and this is."
Well, that's a
Isn't
coincidence.
that
Was,
something?
We
yes.
need to get those names because we have the original photographs in the.
Yeah.
Good
that would
thing,
be something.
we'll do that. But I want to make him a copy of that interview, Because I think Harrison would appreciate that, and when we do take it back, we'll get the names of those people in that picture and put, identify them. Sure.
Mom, you might explain about how you accumulated the piano and also about the gypsies.
Oh, sounds good.
Yeah, is there any way that she'll get a copy of this?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, yes.
And tell us about the gypsies.
About what? It was a custom for the farmers around there. They were all white people. Every afternoon, they'd leave the kids home and they'd all go to Miami to get their groceries and things for the week. Well, one Saturday when they left, here come this caravan of gypsies down the road. Must have been 15 or 20 big wagons. It was quite a parade. And they just took everything they could carry out of their neighbor's house up the road. They lived about a quarter of a mile, but it was on the prairie and we could see just, and I thought, oh my, and I'd heard somebody told me that they would steal children. And I thought, well, they're not going to get these kids. So my dad had a shotgun, double barrel. I loaded this old gun, and when they come by, well, here come these two old women with two big gunny sacks. They got to the door, and I said, you better get out of here, I'm going to shoot you. They argued a little while, but finally they took off. And then they went on down the road, and I didn't know what to do with the gun. It was already loaded and ready to shoot, and I didn't know how to do it. So I laid it on the bed, and when the folks come home, well, of course, all the kids had to run and tell them about the gypsies and everything, and my mother's come in, and I said, I laid the gun on the bed, but I didn't know how to unload it. And I said, it's all ready to shoot. Oh, she said, I'll fix it. And she pulled this thing up and was going to unload it. Shot a hole in the feather bed. And we gathered feathers for a month. She wouldn't wait for Dad to come in and unload it. She was going to do it. But that's what happened to the feather bed. And there lay the new skirt that she was going to wear to town, and she decided she wouldn't, so it still laid there on the bed, and she shot a hole in that too. Oh dear. But they didn't get any children or anything else at our house.
What did gypsy wagon look like?
It's just a big old long wagon. It's a little longer than an ordinary wagon, and it had high sideboards and, canvas over the top. And there was 15 or 20 of those, and they all had extra horses behind, and it made quite a parade, and we were scared. Because up ahead of us there, they just cleaned out their place, but they didn't get anything at ours. I think I would have really shot them. Anyway, I dared them to come in.
Kenneth, come up here and sit down. Kenneth, come here, sit. And all of you close here. Okay, all right. Kenneth, give me a question here for you. About your father, Daniel Bursaw, his activities in Potawatomi politics, and did he and Uncle Pete Bursaw ever go to Washington, D.C.?
My father did. Uncle Pete didn't. My father went. I think it was about 1910 when they were interested in this business.
Well, what did your father do in regard to Potawatomi politics? What was...
Well, I think he was on the committee at one time, and then he was elected to go up there to look after, well, just try to find a way to get a payment, in there.
What time period was this?
It was,
Was he living in Miami or had
no, we lived
down
here. We lived here.
So it was after 1911?
Yes. I think must have been about 1912 is when he went to Washington. And it was in the fall, I think.
Do you have any comments to make about Washington, D.C. in 1912? Did he have anything to say about that?
Well, I just like I said, I was always kind of rattle-brained, and I never did pay too much attention. I guess he did a lot of talking, but I didn't listen. And so, but, how elections go, somebody got elected, and next time. And
The Potawatomi tribe then was operating with a system of committeemen and chairmen at that time, right?
it was long in the Steve Nagonquit age,
Uh-huh.
the old Steve Nagonquit and Bovians and
Were they on the,
Brunos. Well, they're just Indians that all, you know, they were all Potawatomis. And they used to have their council out to when the agency used to be on the corner where the little county deal is now out there.
Uh-huh.
Well, the agency used to be there, and they used to hold their councils outside, the ones I went to, the first ones. The first one I ever went to was in 1911, I guess. No, I went to one in 1909 because I was down here on a visit. But it was just like any other council. There's
I'm sorry, go ahead.
discussions and disagreements. Plenty of
They haven't
disagreements.
changed any?
No, it hasn't changed a bit. In fact, it gets worse by the year, I think.
Was it a 5-man council, the way it is now?
It must have been. I think it was.
Do you have any idea when they started that?
No,
They must have started that in Kansas, but I don't know exactly what time period that they did start that.
no, I don't have any idea.
Was there any particular significant thing that occurred in Potawatomi government or politics or claims or anything between 1912 and say, when they passed the Indian self-determination or whenever that was, 1936? What was that, Joe? It was something that was passed in 1936.
1936.
And I don't remember what the legislation was, but
I don't know either. I don't remember that. I mean, I was kind of out of it then. We lived on the farm, and I didn't go to too many things, so I just don't know.
when your family moved down here to Shawnee, to the Shawnee area, whereabouts did you live?
We lived in this block, 614 on Chapman Street.
On Chapman Street. So you lived here in town.
Yeah.
And what did your father do when he came down here?
Well, he just
Can't
did.
farm on Chapman Street.
No, he just did odd jobs and finally got on to the Rock Island, and he was a carpenter for the Rock Island till he died.
A carpenter?
Yeah, you know, they repaired box cars and.
Oh, I see.
Whether-
Okay, the wooden box cars.
Yes.
I see. Okay. How long did he work for the Rock Island?
Well, he retired. He must have worked, I don't have any idea how long. 20 years, I guess, or more.
Wow.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
What's it?
Do you remember Statehood Day, 1970?
Yeah. My dad was a delegate from Ottawa County. No, that's when the Indian Territory and Oklahoma became one.
Yeah.
Well, that was in Guthrie. Well, my dad was a delegate, representative from Ottawa County to that in 1907.
What did he say about that, about going to Guthrie?
Well, again, I didn't listen. It must have been exciting, though. He used to talk about different ones from different counties, you know, and how they. But really, I just don't know too much about it.
How was the feeling around Miami about statehood? Were the people for it, against it, or indifferent?
No, I don't know. When you live on the farm way back then, there's just not too much excitement over politics.
How did he get to be a delegate?
Well, I don't know that either. He must have been elected some way.
You know, it had to have been chosen. Did he ever say anything, or do you remember him ever saying anything about Bill Murray, who was very prominent, you know, in
Yeah.
the Constitutional Convention?
Well, he never did say too much. My dad wasn't a big talker. That's one drawback.
What about, did he ever say anything, or did you ever hear anybody ever talk about the Sequoia Convention, which took place before the Constitutional Convention, when the Indian Territory was the Indian people wanted to form the state of Sequoia. Did he ever talk about that, or did anybody around you ever talk about that?
No, I don't remember anything about that.
Just wondered, because it was just previous, like
That
a
was
year
in
or two
Muskogee,
before.
wasn't it?
I believe it was, yeah.
1904?
5.
1905.
And the other one, and the Con was in 1906.
No, I don't remember him ever saying too much about it. He just wasn't much to talk about politics or anything.
Then, did he ever, or your parents, did they ever talk very much at all about your Indian background or the Potawatomi history or anything like that?
Mm-mm. That's the reason I don't know anything about Indians. he just goes raise us white, and that's the way we were raised.
What kind of mischief did you get into as a child?
Mischief?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we done a lot of silly things.
Well, like what?
Well, when we had all these mules I'm talking about, and watched him kick to the top of the ceiling, that was one excitement.
It was a hitch ring?
Yeah,
How many mules did you have?
we had 5. Let's see. Yeah, we had 5.
I want to know about that plow that you drove. I don't know anything about plows, and I'd like to know the difference between the, what'd you call it? The plow that you
It was a
Gang plow?
gang plow?
yeah gang.
And just a walking plow. What's the difference? I don't know. I'm ignorant. You have to educate me.
Well, a walking plow just has you walk behind it and then you hold it in the ground, and it has a shear on it. But we were graduated from that. We had a riding, we call it the sulky. It had one shear. It would turn over a strip of ground about that wide as you go along. But the gang plow would throw over 2 of those. It had 2 shears.
Oh,
So we
uptown stuff there.
yeah. And it was my job. I had the big plow and the big teams, and my brother drove the other plow.
Okay. And this is something that I was going to ask her the next question, because I wanted to know what you know about the old Shawnee Indian School out here, where the tribal offices and the BIA is now.
Well, it was already there when we moved here. That was in 1911. And my brothers and sisters all went out there to school. And I used to cook for the employees. And the main building was back of where the office is now. They'd sat over there next to the road that goes down to the barns down there. And my husband was assistant farmer.
And that's where you met him?
No, we were married then. No, I met him.
Where did you meet him?
Well, when we first moved to Shawnee, we didn't have any place to go, so we moved in with my uncle and aunt, and they lived over on Kickapoo, first house south of the Catholic Church. My husband moved down on Pottinger. His folks lived down on Pottinger. Well, because my aunt was a Potawatomi, and Grandma Peltier and her family were Indians, or she was French, but she had an Indian father, or my husband. So she come up to visit my aunt, and she went back and told him that there was a pretty girl up there. Well, of course, they all come to visit, and he tagged along, and that's where I met him.
Oh, it's a set-up deal here. When did you marry your husband?
August the 21st, 1911.
Right away. And Kenneth, you have something down here about Ozetta living at the Indian Agency. When did you live at the Indian Agency?
1915.
That's
Yeah, we stayed about 18 months out there.
that's when you were working out there.
Yes.
He was a farmer.
He was assistant farmer, and I cooked for a while. I didn't cook about 3 months, I think. And then I didn't cook anymore for them. I had another baby, and I had my hands full.
What does I don't know what you call them. Well, the school farmers or the state farmers or whatever they were called. What were they called when they were connected with the school?
He was just the school farmer.
What did they do? What was their function for the school?
Well, they all that land out there was the school farmed it, and the
I see.
farmer, you know, the boys. I don't know whether you know how Indian schools work or not. They go to school a half a day, and then they work a half a day. Well, the big boys out there help farm the ground, and this farmer oversees everything. And then the assistant farmer, he tags behind and sees over things too.
The produce, was it sold or was it used to support
It
the
was
school?
used, I think, to support the school.
Okay.
Can you describe the Indian school? What did it look like?
Well, the two big buildings that are out there, the one on the north, where the Shawnees have, that was the boys' dormitory. And right straight across on the south was the girls' dormitory. In the back they had a schoolhouse. And then they had this little church, it's still out there. That's where the children all went to church on Sunday. And they all wore little uniforms. The boys were dressed in little blue uniforms. And I forgot just what the girls wore. But anyway, it was a uniform. And every Sunday they had drills, just, you know, marching. And they were little experts at that.
I noticed in one of the old pictures that a lady from, I think it was Illinois, who had lived here and apparently who had attended the school, or her mother had attended the school. Anyway, she brought a picture out to the museum. And I noticed there was a little bandstand located in the middle between all of the
Yeah.
grounds.
Well,
What did they use that bandstand for? Did they have concerts or?
well, I don't remember of any concerts, but it was there for a purpose. What? I don't think they had a band there.
How many students were out there?
Oh, man, maybe 100. I don't know just how many there was. There was a big bunch of them.
Yeah.
I know they'd fill that they had a big dining hall over there that set between the things, and they'd fill that to the rim.
And you cooked for the employees?
What is it?
Did you cook for the employees?
Uh-huh.
How many employees did you cook for?
Oh, about 16 or something like that, I think.
What kind of kitchen did you have out there?
Oh, it wasn't very modern, just a big old wood range, coal or wood, both. And then, of course, we had some cabinets and kitchen table and the utensils around. It wasn't very fancy, but it was, you know.
How was the dorm set up, of the boys and girls dorm? How many lived in a room?
Well, they're all, I think they were all in one, mostly in one big room.
Just one big
Downstairs
open
and upstairs, you know, the large one's down, up, and the little one's down.
bay? It was just an open bay type.
Yeah. And I know I had my one sister, she's so ornery, she said she spent her time over there standing in the corner. The matron didn't like her, and she didn't like the matron.
Ozetta, I want to know about Sacred Heart. You went to Sacred Heart, didn't you? as a
No,
student?
I missed that. I didn't get to Sacred Heart.
Did your brothers and sisters go?
My husband went.
Oh, he did. Well, what did he tell you about it? What do you know about Sacred Heart?
Well, it was run by the sisters and the fathers down there. And it's just like any other school, only some of the students boarded there, you know, but he didn't. He lived at home, but he went to school there. I guess it was a pretty good school because, from what I can hear, I didn't see it. It was burned down before I ever seen it, see. But he went to school there. Then he went to Shalako.
He went to Shalaka.
Mm-hmm.
When did he go to Shalaka?
Gosh, I don't know.
How large a family did your husband come from?
I think she had, I think Grandma had, I believe it was 7 children. She, Henry and Arthur, and Mary, Mabel, Oliver, and Libby. Willie, 7.
And whereabouts in that line did Oliver fall? I mean, was he
He was
oldest, middle,
no, he
youngest?
was next to the youngest.
Oh, I see. And you were the oldest in your family.
Uh-huh.
That's very interesting. Where was their allotments? He and his family were allotted down here, right?
All of his brothers and sisters allotments were down around Sacred Heart. But he got an allotment, but somehow in the deal his was canceled, so he never did get his.
Oh, I see.
And but all the rest were down around Sacred Heart.
Till 20 years after.
Oh, well, at the time they gave out these allotments, there was $106 payment. He was 20 years old then, but my father-in-law wrote so many letters to Washington that he finally got his $106 payment. And then he took his $106 payment and we got married. he was 20 and I was 17.
Well, that's a handful of money to start off on, isn't it? 12 children.
Yeah,
Did you have 12
I had 12 children.
Bless your heart, Ozetta. You were patterned. Your husband had a large family, and then you came from a large family, and then you had 12 of your own. For goodness sake.
I always told him I was glad my kids raised their own kids because I'd been up to my neck in babies all my life.
Oh, for goodness sake. Yeah, have you got any questions on your mind? I mean, you got anything about this period that we haven't asked you? Because there's so many things that I don't know, but you know. Any of you guys? Questions, Kathleen?
Well, I was going to, what I was interested in is when my father was Indian police, and when he worked at the Indian Agency, and was he commissioned a federal officer? I always thought he was. And they did make.
He was a U.S. deputy. He was a U.S. deputy.
Yeah.
He was never. He didn't draw any salary, but that was his title.
He did hold a commission.
Yeah, and he looked after the Indians when they get in trouble. He worked over there 8 years, I think.
Who commissioned him, Ozetta, do you know?
Oh,
Was it the tribe, or was it federal office, or?
Jim Brown, was
it seems like it must have been the federal deal,
Okay.
I believe. There was a man by the name of
Was it Jim Brown?
Jim Brown, and he was a U.S. Marshal. And he wore this badge, but he didn't get the salary that went with it.
Oh, that's interesting. Why not?
No,
Well, he drew a salary over there, and that all went in, you know.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Oh. And what period of time are we talking about here? When was he commissioned?
Oh, let's see, we moved over there in 1931. And then we moved, we lived over there at the agency for 3 years. And then he worked a long time after we moved away from the agency. That's when we moved on the Kickapoo farm. We decided the boys were big enough and we'd help out that way. So we moved out there. But he worked out there about almost 3 years, I think, after we moved.
What about the question, Kathleen's question about the raids? What kind of raids did they have out there?
Well, there was, the Indians used to have a lot of trouble with bootleggers. I mean, so he'd scout around, and he had his little tribe, a little crew that went with him.
They have that on Indian land?
Yeah, they'd have these, the white people would have these stills, but they sold it to the Indians.
I see. Oh, okay. Other Indians from other tribes were the deputies also
Yeah.
along with him.
Yeah, let's see, he had a snake, two panthers, green feather. Huh? Who?
Little elephant.
Oh, elephant?
Small guy, but a little man.
No, he just said it's John Snake. Green feather, two panthers. What's that Margaret and
Brand.
Bryant?
the one that the two girls that lived at my class? Brave. Oh yeah, he had a Brave. That was the names of the
Of his
deputies. Yes.
Goodness, that sounds like a mean posse. I don't think I would have braved that posse. Okay.
On the lot, McNeil, he had it long enough that they did build a house of some sort on it and lived in it for a while before he lost the allotment of that land. It was a lot bigger, what he called it.
He was grown and had a house on that allotment when he lost it?
Well, no, he lost it when they canceled it some way when he was just a baby. But they owned it, he owned it long enough for the folks to build a log cabin on it. And I don't know whether they ever lived on there or not, but anyway.
That's very interesting. How many acres was it? Do you know, Ozetta?
Whatever their allotment was, I think.
Because he was 40 acres? 80 acres for children, yeah, okay, 80 acres.
How come they canceled his lot?
Well, I don't know. There were some others canceled at the same time.
Then that was not unusual. There were some others that...
There were others, yeah.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Very interesting.
And my father-in-law worked and wrote and fussed with the agents and everything for 20 years, but it never was, he got the payment, but he didn't get the land back.
Strange. Okay, do you all have any other questions about this period of time? Let's see here. The agency was located on the west side of the highway there where the hospital is now. That's what she mentioned a while ago. Okay, raised on the whiskey stills.
When they all
Also,
went to school from there too, he drove a bus.
drove a bus. When did you do that?
Well, that was part of the job. He was just general roustabout over there. And he hauled patients to the hospital at Concho and Lawton and all that. We had a nurse, but, he helped her out. So he was just a roustabout over there, and whenever anything like that come up, so he drove the kids to school, and then he did whatever else was to be done. But all the employees' children went to school in Shawnee.
All day?
Mm-hmm.
And she
Old
was
Army
She was
nurse.
an old Army nurse.
Army nurse.
She was born and raised in Canada, and she had 12 brothers.
When was she in the Army?
World War
World
I.
War I.
Okay, and her name is
What was her given?
Anna Holiday.
Was she?
Anna Holiday.
Did she go overseas?
Yes. All the brothers enlisted.
First one we found.
You've got to talk to her, Joe. Okay, thank you for the information on the lady. We'll have to talk with her.
She was sure good to us. She took us. She was good to Indians. period.
All of her brothers enlisted, and they were all sent over to Europe. So she decided, well, I'm going too. So she popped up over there, and the brothers were very surprised. What are you doing here, Anna?
I have a question. Who was the biggest bootlegger around here?
Oh, the biggest bootlegger. Well, that's a question. That we had a lot of bootleggers a long time ago. But the biggest one that I remember, let's see, what was his name?
Was it
Was
Garrett?
it Garrett?
He was a big one.
Right, Kathleen, you can talk.
Down there across the river. Remember that big circle they had
Yeah.
on the south of the river?
Oh, well.
Canadian.
Is that where Hattie still?
No, they just sold the
They
whiskey.
just sold it. How did he distribute this
What was
whiskey?
the name of those girls?
Charlie
Esley.
Esley.
He was a big one.
Charlie Esley.
Yeah.
And then
Oh my, find
Charlie
out all
Dean
about the
How'd
seedy
they-
side of Shawnee.
How'd they distribute the whiskey? Without getting caught?
Well, the children delivered that partly.
The children,
They run around with
the Easley children, the
Esley.
Esley,
How'd they,
Esley.
Eslick.
But I didn't know this was going on.
how'd the,
You were helping them deliver the booze.
I didn't know that they had.
Oh, you didn't know
delivery,
that's what you were doing.
But I was doing stopping down through Shawnee in different areas, you know, and.
where'd they carry the whiskey in?
They carried it behind the whole back seat of the front seat was made into a cavity back there, covered up with a cloth of a seat cover. And they carried it in the back of the front seat. And I didn't know that till I throwed my arm over it one day and like I broke a bottle.
I went with them when they boxed it up and they had
Boy, they had
a whole load of it.
How
that
old
day.
were you, Kenneth?
Yeah, I was,
About 17, wasn't it?
16,
15.
something like that.
Yeah.
This is an old car they had?
This was, well, they had the best of cars. They
Yeah.
had brand new Pontiacs.
But they were friends of kids, and I had no idea they were.
I went with them one day and when they went to get it, and they loaded up the whole back end of it, and, I think it was down at Seminole or somewhere down there. And we brought it back.
They went to the bootleggers in Seminole and loaded up the White Lightning and brought it back.
Their door to their kitchen was a panel door seal, and it had the facing on it would raise up, and it would have pints of liquor stacked back in these little shelves back in the facing of the door. And it was well hidden.
Where did they live, Kenneth?
Well, they used to live down at the old Rainbow Park,
Uh-huh.
and then they moved on East Highland out by the country club.
They take the door facing with them?
Well, they made
It was in the door facing it, back of them.
they knew how to do all that. They was pretty good about hiding. Of course, they'd been raided several times by the authorities, but they knew how to hide.
For goodness.
Who was making the whiskey? Where were they getting it?
At one time, they wanted us to make a run from Arkansas and bring it back in, but we didn't fall for that at all. We was too young and too far from home to make them kind of trips. But they would have actually used us if we'd have permitted it. They wasn't above asking a young person to do things like that.
Isn't that something?
That's just like I said, when your kids are around the corner, you never know what they're doing.
And all the time, your poor mother was innocent
Well, yes.
of all this knowledge.
But all during that, well, I say it was a period of 3 years, we never had an incident where we came close to being arrested or anything like that.
Well, that's good.
But we didn't know that after we found out about it, we were very cautious of where we went with them after that.
I'm curious about this first thing you wrote up here, Kathleen. They also retrieved the property of Indians, blankets and other things of value. They apparently need them to get them out of jail.
Well, my mother and I was always, I don't know, we kind of changed our minds in later years here, but especially me, I never liked to see an Indian drinking. Something about it it was a real sad feeling. I never liked to see them go to jail or anything like that, and he used to go get these blankets. Their clothes, anything they would pawn in these shops, well, he would retrieve these for the Indians, also get them out of jail so they could go back to their families as near as I can remember. Now, she can fill you in on that better than I could.
Okay, you want to tell me about that, Ozetta? Was this during the time that he was a deputy, or was this was this?
Yeah, it
All
must
the
have been.
time.
We were in high school then.
He always, Well, that's the reason he hunted these bootleggers. Was to help the Indians to,
Get rid of the whiskey.
keep them from it being so handy for them to get. And when there was anything to give away, or sometimes the government would send bundles of stuff, coats and shoes and things like that. And he'd always see that the needy ones got things. There was a lot of different little things tied to this job. One time they sent a bunch of frozen, sheep. And it was in the wintertime, had a great big snow on the ground, and then you could see Indians carrying their sheep, frozen sheep, going home with them. Everybody got a sheep.
The next piece of information that Kathleen has mentioned here is World War II, Joe. And one of Kathleen's questions is, where did you live during World War II? Was that
614 North Chapman.
you were still over there?
Still over there.
Okay. I think, what were you doing on the day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor when you heard about it?
Oh, we
You
lived
lived
out on the farm then. We hadn't moved to town yet.
I see.
We lived out on the farm, and my husband had a brother that lived out by the lake out there. So my husband and I decided to go out to their house. And on the way, we stopped to get some gasoline, and they had just gotten the word that the Japanese had bombed, whatever they bombed first. Pearl Harbor. So that's the first we knew of it. And then during the next 6 months, I had 3 sons, a daughter, and 5 son-in-laws in the war.
Mm. What was your feeling when you heard the news about Pearl Harbor?
Well, it was kind of scary. I knew I had a bunch of youngsters just about that age, and of course the war in Germany had been going on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What about World War I? Did you do any work for the war effort?
No, I didn't. We lived on the farm then, and they drafted people then. They come to the first draft, and it was over just before they got my husband, and we had 4 children by that time, little ones.
That Armistice Day. What was that day like?
Well, it was kind of crazy. Everybody kind of went wild.
Did you all come to? Well, did you live in Shawnee? Or did you live on the farm then?
We were in Shawnee at the time, yes. And land everybody. No, that was World War II. World War I, we still lived out on the farm out.
Did you come into town for the celebration?
No, I didn't. No, we didn't come in for that. We were too far out.
1920s. Were there many flappers in Shawnee?
Flappers? Yeah.
How'd they dress?
Little short skirts, short as they could. First it was way down here, and then they come up way up here all up, overnight.
I bet that was a shock.
It was.
Were you a flapper?
Me?
Yeah.
No. I don't, no, she kinda held us down.
Did you let your girls bob their hair?
Yeah, they could cut their hair. In fact, I cut it for them. I was a barber and
Where'd you learn to do that?
on all these heads.
Well, you had 12 to practice on, didn't you?
What makes a girl a flapper? Besides the dresses, what do they do?
Well, I think they just want to do what every other girl does. And whoever started, well, she started all of it, and they all followed.
Where does the word come from? The word flapper.
I think these short dresses, did they originate in England?
I don't know.
It seemed like it all started, we used to get all of our styles from over there. And I think those short skirts happened over there, and then there's all the style over here.
They must have blamed it on the war.
Yeah.
Shortages or something,
Yeah.
on World War One.
It has a lot to do with it.
Oh, let's,
Know
There's
how
a-
headstrong women are. She, ask her about her children and their work in World War II, Joe.
okay.
And, just wanna bring that here too.
Okay. The Depression, 1930s. How did that affect you and your family?
Well, we didn't have to have any relief of any kind, but we didn't live too high. We lived on a farm, and my husband still worked for the agency. And we had that income. That was what we raised on the farm.
Did any of your family do any work for the WPA or for CCC?
Yeah, my one son joined this, what did they call it? Yeah, the CCCs. He went to Colorado and worked in the timber up there and made bridges and things and all up in there.
What WPA projects are going on around here?
Well, I just don't really know. I know there was a lot of WPAs, but
Junior high school, post office,
It was Raymond that joined the CCC, right?
you're right. Uh-huh.
The post office and
Oh.
the junior high school and
Well,
what
he
else?
did the terracing, my dad.
Oh, the terracing at the junior high school.
No, that was in 1923 when he terraced the junior high down here. And then he dug the post office basement for the first part of the post office, you know, that's on the corner. Of course, a lot has been added to it, but he dug the basement for the post office down here in town in 19...
Demon horses.
He did it with a team and horses.
And that
Yeah.
still stands, junior high, like it was.
Son of a gun, good work tells, isn't it? Those were WPA projects.
I don't know that.
Well, that came before.
Whenever I see one of these little things, you know, it says WPA on the sidewalk or in a building, and then I always used to look for them.
One of their main projects in the WPA was
Bridges and things.
doing terracing on farms. and
Yeah, that was one.
Doing baffles in the, doing baffling of the ditches, the erosion of the land on
Uh-huh.
these farms.
Did they did that around in this
They
area?
did this around that.
That's
these
called
areas.
baffling?
Well, they built a rock dam sort of a thing
Yeah, okay.
across the streams, you know,
Uh-huh.
the little stream, the ditches, and then it would fill in later and smooth that part of the land back out again. And they did a lot of that field
Yeah.
area in here.
I didn't, I'm sorry.
I was just trying to say when they fixed the ponds and stopped in too for the farmers.
How bad were the dust storms around here?
Was it?
The dust storms in the 30s?
Oh, land. They were so bad that you couldn't, there was a time or two, we were on the farm then out west of town. They were so bad that we couldn't even drive the horses. And the dust, oh my, it would drift up around the windows. No matter what you did, you had a little drift of dust every place. Everything was dusty, dry.
How long would a dust storm last?
Oh, days sometimes. We don't have dust storms anymore like we used to have.
No, they put in shelter belts, right?
Yeah.
Belts.
Planted trees, and during the World War I, there was so much demand for wheat, and out in the west they pulled up all the trees and plowed up all the prairie and planted wheat, and then there was nothing there to hold anything. So when the wind did start blowing, it just took Mexico dust way up in no telling where, and we were just drifted. It wasn't as bad here as it's. I've seen pictures and heard people talk about. So
How many people around here went to California in that period? The
Oh,
Okies.
I don't have any idea. There's a lot of people left Shawnee, but I don't have any idea how many.
Did you know anybody that did? I mean,
No, just come right down to it. I don't know anybody that did just really pack up and go. But there was a lot of people went, especially in the western part
uh-huh.
where it was so bad.
What about work for the war effort in World War II?
We didn't do any of it, I don't think.
Any of the kids do any work?
They were all gone for World War II. They were all in the Army, and the Air Force and the Navy.
Me and Bud,
Huh?
me and Bud worked in the shipyard,
Yeah, in the shipyard.
What shipyard?
the Richmond shipyard
Is that in
at Richmond, California.
California?
What'd you do, Ken?
I was a welder. I took that was another program. That was another program that was backed up by the government. Then was the NY,
Yeah.
National Youth Association,
Uh-huh,
and I took my welding training up here at OBU.
uh-huh.
And after you got 350 hours of welding, then you were sent to the West Coast to work in the shipyard if that's where you wanted to go.
Uh-huh.
And that's where Kaiser shipyards would pay your way out, and you'd pay them back out of your wages.
Uh-huh.
And I worked there from 1942 until the last part of 1943, 44. I'll take that back.
You're the leader.
And then I was came back home and got back into the Navy then.
You was the leader.
Yeah, well, I ended up, I was 19 years old, and I was the youngest foreman that they had in that shipyard at that time. And then my brother came out later on, Buddy, my oldest brother, and then he worked after I left. I forgot how many years he stayed out till it closed down, I believe.
Yeah.
What were your duties as foreman in the shipyards?
At that time, that was when the women made their implement into the workforce.
Rosie the Riveter?
Rosie the Riveter and the chipper, and they joined in on the welding. There's women welders, chippers, riveters, electricians, and I had a mixture crew of 19 people, of young people and old people that I even helped train and oversee their work, whether it was quality work or
What kind of ships were you building?
they were cargo ships.
Cargo ships? I have seen and heard that in the highest period of productivity, they were making a ship a day.
Yes, that's right.
Were you making a ship a day out there?
Well, we'd run the assembly part that we worked on was the deck houses. Whenever we got through in the deck house, we was putting out one a day, which they would put out lay the keel of the ship and everything, and one ship everybody done their work of one deck house, one lower part of the boat that'd all be assembling, and one would be leaving the ways going down to the ways of the water in one day. It was quite an assembly.
Sounds like it. What, Kathleen, you said something about what you learned,
Well,
what you
Buddy
said?
and I took our, he went on with his, but we took our sheet metal and, took sheet metal and riveting, and he took sheet metal and welding, I believe it was. And then I decided when it come time for him to go to California to the shipyard, that I would go into the Army, so I went into the wax instead.
What'd you do in the Army?
Me, I worked, what do you call these, where the area operations, where where well, in fact, the first time we took our training, and I worked first time in a Bell Telephone Building in New York City, and then I went on down to Florida, and we trained officers for this same thing, you know, area operations, and that's one of these incoming and outgoing planes. It was in the Air Force, and then we followed this same thing when we went overseas, and we did about the same thing, only we were in signal corps there with area operations, only we did paperwork there instead. And then, you know, all the rest of the war, during the rest of the war.
What part of Europe were you in?
I was in New Guinea and the Philippines and the South Pacific.
How close are you to the fighting?
Well, sometimes they dropped bombs in New Guinea. After it had moved on up to the Philippines, we got all the wounded soldiers back down in there, you know, in the hospitals and stuff like that. But then we moved on to the Philippines, and the war moved on further up, you know, fast. Of course,
Were you still training officers at that time?
Oh, no.
What
But
were
we
you-
met a lot of them that we had trained.
Okay. What did you do in New Guinea? What were your duties?
I was chief clerk in the signal section.
And what did you do?
Well, as a clerk, I had just gathered up the papers and all the incoming, well, what we call them, messages. We call them messages, you know, corps that come in from the signal corps. And we gathered up the messages, and then I had typists and things under me. I didn't do the typing stuff myself. Then we had to proofread and hand them back to our people ahead of us, you know, our officers.
Would you describe one of the air raids when they were bombing?
Well, I didn't. I wasn't directly in them.
You weren't?
But we would hear about them, and then that's when the hospitals were there, those big hospitals, and they called them general on the islands. I don't know what they were, and they'd come back into these islands. They great big long tents. I don't know how many beds they'd hold, but they were, it was just really something. Well, very little wood in them, and they had mosquito netting on the sides, and that's all we'd see of it, is the wounded that come back. But we knew that New Guinea had raids in different parts, and there was also a lot of Japanese still in there that would steal our parts from our airplanes and things where the landing strips were, you know. So they knew that was going on all the time.
What rank did you hold?
Well, when I got out, I was a tech sergeant.
Go ahead.
Kenneth and Gerald also. I met my brother Gerald when I was in Manila in the Philippines, and he was all up on Okinawa, and then at the same time, Kenneth was also, and he can tell you what do you want to know about it. He was also in the Pacific at the same time, and two of my brother-in-laws were there.
Did you see any of the Americans that were released from Santo Tomas? And that's a big university. When the Japanese took the Philippines, they rounded up all Americans, and they put them in a prison camp at St. Thomas University, Santo Tomas.
No,
And the
but
Americans.
we've seen some horrible sights
Yeah.
whenever we went to Corregidor and visiting on boats and things. The Navy would take us to all these things, to see these things for first sight in the prisoner of war camps and all that. We've seen all of those things, but the worst thing we seen was where we went into these tunnels, you know, and there still lay the Japanese with their uniforms on, which made you very sad, wondering if our own people were laying someplace with their uniforms still on their bodies.
Was that after the war was over, or was it still going
That's
on?
yeah, well,
Still going.
it was still going on. We were still in the Philippines when the war was over, because that was just like letting the air out of a big tube
Yeah.
to us.
What was your reaction when you heard about the bomb on Hiroshima?
It just made you sick and weak and or something all over. We were there, and it just make you sick. Looks like you wanted to vomit or something. It just I don't know. I guess we thought we was gonna get part of it or something. I don't know.
Well, if you've ever been around bombing and seen what it does to bodies, and you put a bomb like they set off in Japan, you can just imagine the thousands of people had vanished over that one
Mhm.
bomb.
You see, it was within hours, we heard this too.
Where were you in the South Pacific, Kenneth?
I started out at Pearl Harbor, and we were 5 days out of Pearl Harbor aboard the USS Franklin CV-13. It was one of the Essex type carriers of 27,000 tons. And we had 103 fighter bombers aboard with 3,200 men. And 5 days out of Pearl, we was 200 miles off the shore of Paiushu, and we got hit by two suicides with 250 armored piercing bombs, and they hit us right midship. It was a low-hanging cloud day, you know, the visibility was kind of low, and they made a raid on us, and they blew us a foot. That 27,000 pound carrier was raised out of the water by 12 inches according to pictures. And our own bombs just gutted us. And on the way back, there was 704 men brought that carrier back into the New York Harbor.
Oh, so it didn't sink it then?
No. It was the first carrier that they had on record of taking a 17-degree list. Never seen.
It was a well-made ship.
Well-made ship. It had, there was hardly, well, there was such big holes into the flight deck that you couldn't have got a plane or anything off of it. And there was only 2 of our planes got off of it during that bombing. The bombs hit, well then we had just got through loading our planes for morning patrol, and our elevators and everything were wide open. And when them bombs hit, well, it just gutted us. But we managed to take the ship and have it in tow for 2 days, and then we hit Ulithi and got repairs and come on back in there.
He was a member of the 704 Club, which is what the members that came back for the ship.
704.
Out of
Yeah.
30, what was it?
Yeah, they call it the 704 Club. That was 704 that left out of the 3,200. That doesn't mean everybody was killed. That meant that they was pushed either overboard, or they had to jump on their own initiative, and then some of them, after they jumped, which we just got through having, was a class telling us to be sure and take off our helmets before we hit the water. Well, we was 70 foot from the water, and some of those younger people got so scared of the fire and everything, they just jumped with the hood on, their helmet on, but it broke their neck when they hit the water. And there was many ways that we had casualties, but the actual bombing, we lost 888 casualties. But this was what I was saying a while ago. Once you see something that a bomb can do, you hear this big bomb going off, why it just sends a real heavy fear into you. Kind of a sickening feeling.
How long were you in the service, Kenneth?
18 months.
What was your rank?
Came out as a 3rd class petty officer. We came back into Pearl, and our sister ship, the Intrepid, was due back out to go to the Mediterranean, and at that time the bomb had went off. Well, everybody was wanting to go home and get out of the service as quickly as possible. So the sister ship was being shipped to the Mediterranean area, but then they turned around and wanted to give me a chief's petty officer's rating over the maintenance welding shops, and I turned it down right quick because I had a young boy and a wife at home.
You did meet Raymond in Hawaii, didn't you?
Gerald and Raymond in World War II,
Hmm.
and Raymond was on a subtender.
Yeah.
What's a subtender?
The subtender is a large maintenance ship that takes care of submarines only. And they had enough equipment aboard that big ship to completely redo the inside of a submarine. And well, it was I forgot what the tonnage of it was, but it was an enormous ship, and it had a complete machine shop, welding shop, electrical shops, anything that had anything to do pertaining to rebuilding or refurbishing a submarine. It's at sea. That ship could do it.
What was Raymond's job? Was he a welder?
Raymond was a coxswain. He was. I didn't know his rank at that time.
I never did know it. I forgot what it was.
Usually, a coxswain is the one that takes the captain or the officer is usually a first-class petty officer. But I met Raymond in Pearl Harbor just before we left to go to Japan, and on Task Force 58. And then I met him when we come back, and he couldn't believe seeing the ship then, and then seeing it coming back at a 17-degree list. He couldn't believe it.
I can understand that. I can understand that. Oh yeah. What about the name of the ship? The Raymond ship? You remember the name of the ship, Ozetta?
The
No.
USS Bushnell.
That's
Yeah, Bushnell, that's it.
the USS Bushnell.
Mhm.
That's a gun, isn't it? They make guns or
Yes,
binoculars or
Franklin.
something.
I've seen that side by somewhere else beside on that ship.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Bushnell makes lenses or something. That's very interesting. Now, in the line of your brothers and sisters, Raymond is older, or Raymond was older than you.
He was 1 year older than I was.
Okay, and Gerald was how
1
much
year
was
older, about 14 months older than Raymond.
Hmm.
that? Okay. So you were the youngest of
I
those
was the
three.
youngest
You were
of
the
four
youngest.
boys, I
Okay.
Gerald was Air Force.
It was nothing for Raymond's ship to go out and stay 18 months in one place in the water, waiting on wherever the activity of the submarines were. And every so often they'd get raided by maybe a single or a couple of Jap suicides.
Let me ask a question. Whenever did you see the kamikaze planes coming in for the Franklin?
Mm-hmm. Oh yes.
What was your reaction? And when they hit, what'd you do?
At that time, whenever you was at a battle station, mine was on the 7th deck of the damage control area, and whenever they'd get hit, all you'd hear was a big loud vibration of the ship and a bang. You know, of course it was tremendous. But you wouldn't be able to up on board ship now. After we got up above, we could see them. And at one time, one of the suicides was coming at us. I strapped myself into one of the 10mm guns and was going to help them out on the firing part of it, and come to find out the magazine was empty. So that was all in vain to try to help them out. But we did get strafed pretty heavily, and we had no way of getting away from them because we were in tow then.
This is after you were hit then?
Yes, It's the battle cruiser Santa Fe was the one that had us in tow.
Okay. And the initial kamikaze that hit the Franklin first, did you see that?
No, I didn't get to see the actual action of that. Those two planes did go make the raid and turn and start back at us to finish us off, but the two planes that took off was, with my understanding, was after they took off, they did get the two suicides that bombed us.
Okay, what did you do in the initial attack? The first ones?
The first attack, I had went down to the breakfast line. It was just before 7 o'clock, and with a feeling that I shouldn't be there. And at 7:04, the bombs hit, and that was the area that was hit at that time was the galley decks and the upper part of the ship right in midship. and up on the flight deck, I'd say there was 100 people lined up for chow line on the hangar deck going down into the galley deck, and those people didn't make it.
Well, he had a hunch that something was gonna happen until he just got off watch. And when he got down there to get something to eat because he was hungry, well, something told him to get the heck out of there, and he grabbed a orange and went to his bunk, and just as he got to his bunk, it hit. And that's when all of them were killed there. So really, there was right up in the paper here, Shawnee paper, about the hunch saves a sailor's life.
Yeah, you'd get to, I've had several feelings of that nature through my life, but that was one that was a strong feeling to get out now, you know. And I did get out, and it's a good thing I did.
Where, before the first attack, or do you know, where was the aircraft carrier heading? What?
We were to meet with the Task Force 58, which was headed for Kyushu. On our way up there, we also bombed other islands. The Task Force 58 pilots did, but the main designation for the task force was the mainland of Japan, in which we hit the Kyushu Island. Now, how far they went on up with the rest of the task force, see, they just went right on the left of us. Once you're hitting the water, they just keep right on it going, and they leave you somebody to protect you, like the cruiser Pittsburgh and the cruiser Santa Fe, and then we were on our own. The 3 ships were, but the other task force went right on up through the other part of the mainland. But I don't know what their cities were.
Were you involved in like truck?
We had our planes did hit truck, yes. They hit Kyushu, Hiroshima, not Iwo Jima is what I was trying to think.
Yeah.
And of course Kyushu then.
Wasn't your ship carrying those tiny Tims or something for the first time?
Yes, we somehow was a very individual group. Even in our boot camp, we knew that we were being trained in a different manner than some of the others were being trained, and it was a very secretive movement. And on our way from Great Lakes to the West Coast to pick up our ship, we went all the way through to Olathe, Kansas, down in through New Mexico, down to the bottom part of the California coast, and as we went along, we picked up different personnel. And on the way up to the West Coast, every time we'd make a stop, we'd take on different personnel. And the reason I thought we was a different kind of group, we had FBI agents at every door of the train, and it was a large train. And we did our own cooking, had our own mess hall right on the train with us. And when we started traveling, we'd go to a designation where they just absolutely run out of food and had to stop. And we was carrying also 40 prisoners that we had to help watch. But we went all the way up to the West Coast to Bremerton, Washington. And that was quite a trip from the Great Lakes to the south part of the United States and back up to the northwest corner of the United States with all these FBI agents and picking up these different personnel.
She said something about tiny Tims?
And there was, on board this ship, we went aboard the carrier Franklin at Bremerton, Washington, and we hit a storm off of the west coast with a 100-mile-an-hour wind, and we were empty at that time, and the waves were so great that when the ship went down, the flight deck was 70 foot from the water. Those waves peeled that flight deck back up off that structure, and we had to go into Alameda, California then to get repairs there, and from there we took on some these 2-engine bombers, dive bombers, for Jimmy Doolittle. after they did that, well, they made their raid then before all this started happening. This is when the Task Force 58 was being formed all over the Pacific. And we was to meet around the little island of Ulithia. And that was our meeting place. And all this action was taking place on all over the Pacific. Different ships was to be at a certain destination, you know. And we took our load into Pearl Harbor. And then that was when we left there and got hit.
Well, I wanted to tell about the Tiny Tim.
Oh, and then on board our ship, though, the main event that we was carrying was the new bomb that they called the Tiny Tim. And those Tiny Tim bombs was, I guess the next thing I think was to being a, what they call a shrapnel bomb, at a above the ground bomb. And we were carrying those things for the first time, and this is what was well guarded. They didn't even let it out.
You also mentioned the fact that you had 40 prisoners on that train. What kind of prisoners?
They were American prisoners. Our own people that didn't want to go back to the Pacific.
Okay.
Oh.
AWOLs.
AWOLs and you name it. Murders. They was guarded real close. But those being among those prisoners, some of those had the high-ranking medals of the whole thing. I had a whole chest full of ribbons and medals, but they had done their part and they just didn't want to go back. They just, I guess what you'd call fatigue, battle fatigue, and they just didn't want no more of it.
Ken, tell them about the Tiny Tims that got loose after the ship was hit. That's what I want you to get.
Well, yeah. Well, during that time, we had a bomb. That raid we had these chutes that they let these bombs come down to lower decks, or had little elevators to pull them up through these chutes. Well, one of those Tiny Tim bombs broke through that armored plating on that chute and went into the what we call the shower room of the ship, one of the ships, and that thing would roll back and forth in that shower room, and it never did go off. But we didn't know by what time that it might go off, and it put up quite a stir, you know, as to how they was going to get in there and get that bomb out of there. And they got a bomb crew at Ulithia, and they went down and got it out of there. It never did blow up, thank goodness, because if it had it would have started us all over with, because we still had big loads of bombs on it. And that wasn't the only bomb that was loose on that ship. We had two 500-pound bombs loose on that ship. And we just got through eating, some of the chow people did, and they had still left this Lysol on the deck of that ship. And to try to get through that ship with the lights out, only the emergency lights were on down on the lower decks. We tried to get through those chow lines, hallways, and those, just wherever you could pick your way through the debris down there, you know. Well, here was these two big banging noises going on. We didn't know what it was, and we was coming back up to go up to the top side. And it wasn't just certain ways you could get up to the top side anymore, because a lot of stuff was blowing together and out of shape, you know. And we walked in there, and there was just enough light to look down before we stepped in that whatever it was coming at us. And when it got over by the doorway where we was at, this officer, now his name was Lieutenant Graham, but there was that 500-pound bomb, and I don't know whether I turned white or black or what, but there was no place to go but just stand there, you know. Other side, then, and here comes both of them in. Did knock the other one loose that was sitting in there. And we went up topside and told the commander up there that these things were going on down there, and he said, "Oh my, that's all we need right now." So Lieutenant Graham got you at a time like that, an emergency, you can only ask for volunteers. You don't say you or you, let's go, because during emergency it's volunteer help in. But we got enough people to go back down there to tie those big bombs back against the wall, and I guess that's why I'm bald-headed. Just tying those bombs up.
Gerald was in the Air Force.
Mhm.
What? Where was he during the war? In the sky,
was
I know.
He was stationed on Okinawa. He was over in the Pacific area.
All your children that were in the service were over in the Pacific, huh?
Mhm.
Hmm.
One son-in-law was in Germany.
He was all through the invasion.
Mm.
Yeah, Ruby said.
But the rest of them were all in the Pacific.
Mercy, you've got a whole history of World War II right in your family. Mercy. Somebody ought to just write that down, you know. Really? Gerald was stationed in Okinawa.
Mhm.
What was he flying?
B-17s?
I think that's what it
I
was.
think that's what it was. Or B.
He was, he did, he
52?
was on the
He
ship.
was
He
a-
didn't fly, he washed out at cadets on account of a broken vertebrae.
Oh, I see. Okay. He was a crew.
He was in a crew.
What was his job, Ozetta?
He's a
What-
radio,
Communications radio.
yeah, communication.
What raids did he go on, or do you know what
I
he
don't have
did?
the site thing.
I know that he before they dropped those bombs on Hiroshima or whatever, he distributed the leaflets. His plane, the leaflets, they flew them all over and dropped them that there was going to be a raid, and he was on that plane.
They also carried prisoners of war back down to the Philippines because that's where him and I met while I was working there. They carried these prisoners of war down there too, and that was a dangerous situation to get wherever they went to pick them up. I don't know.
But the battles he was in or anything, he never did talk about it too much. But he's in the war till it was over, and then he retired after 20 years or
He was
22.
also in the big airlift over Germany, when all of that was going on.
Yeah.
Oh, the Berlin airlift?
Yes,
Yeah.
he was all
47.
through that. And he also was he's stationed in Greenland, Germany, Azores, everywhere.
He had a very long career with the military.
Yeah.
He retired as a ward officer.
Well, Ozetta, what was it like when all these children came back home?
Well, we just all got together and rejoiced.
I imagine. Kathleen says here that your husband Oliver was working at Tinker Field at the time.
Yeah, he was a guard up there.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to go to Tinker, but he said, your place is here, so I stayed here. I mean, wherever we lived.
She didn't tell about one daughter of hers that I always was proud to tell that she had her nurse's training after she graduated to Lawton Kiowa Indian Hospital. She went to Nashville in Washington, and then she worked there. She met her husband there, and she also had a real good friend that, what was her name? She was Ponca Indian,
Uh-huh.
and, her name is Hannah Roy.
Yeah.
And she married an Insinger or something like that, and they were both engineers on the Grand Coulee Dam, and their doctor had introduced those two together. But anyway, during the war, they come down, they retrained, they were typists during the war, and but anyway, that was her hospital. She got her training there, and I was always real proud of her. She was the only nurse in our family.
Well, her husband's the one that helped build the Grand Coulee, wasn't he?
Yes, he was an engineer on the Grand Coulee Dam there at the time. She married both the girls' husbands. But Hannah was a Ponca Indian, and they were very good friends, and they lived with Mama during World War II.
What was her name?
Ruby Peltier and then Ruby Irwin, and then Hannah Roy was the Ponca Indian that came and lived with Mama also.
Irwin was her married name.
Ruby's
Your
her name.
sister Ruby. Oh, that's interesting.
Ruby was the one that at the time we lived out here west of Shawnee on the farm, when the old washing machine would break down, was always the one that would kind of help us out on repairs and stuff.
She fixed the washing machine?
She'd send a little bit of money to help fix that old washing machine.
Oh, well, bless her heart. What, Kenneth, what do you remember? We've talked about a lot of things. Is there something in particular that we've missed that you think we ought to mention, we ought to talk about?
You'll probably think about how many things, don't you?
Not right now.
Yeah, well, there's always a second time,
Mrs. Peltier, what's your favorite childhood memory?
Well, let's see. I don't know. I've got a lot of memories. I guess just seeing all the kids well and everything. All of my sisters and brothers well. We wasn't a sickly family. We just grew like topsy. But they were always well.
Ozetta,
Mm.
do you have a philosophy or something that you live your life by?
Well, I've lived my life, you might say, one day at a time, and done the best I could on that day. And I planned ahead a lot of times, and sometimes those plans fell through, but I guess just doing the best you can do at anything you're doing is about all.
Well, I can certainly say I think from the period of time that I have known you that you have done that.
She's been the constitution of the whole family, with all the grandchildren.
Kids all did everything she didn't.
She's quite a lady. She's quite
Well,
a
thank
lady.
you.
You have
Thank
more
you.
questions?
No.
I've thought about everything I can think of, and I know, like you, I'll remember 100,000 things I want to ask her later on. So what we'll have to do is come back and talk to you again when we think of all the things we missed, Ozetta.
Okay.
But I do want to thank you so much for your time and patience, and it has been a real
Well,
pleasure
you're
to
certainly
talk to you.
welcome. I've enjoyed it.
You have no idea how long I have waited and looked forward to this.
Well,
I do want to thank you.
well, you're perfectly welcome.